Right, so I'm going to talk you through the main points of chapter 3 of Sac de Billes. So this is an important chapter because it marks a lot of changes in the boys' lives. So if we talk about the key changes first, any page references I make you'll find in your copy of the book. So the first thing that we see right at the start of this chapter is the increasing severity of restrictions against the Jews. The chapter starts with Joe having his star sewn on by his mum, not really understanding what's going on, but we, the reader, understand. So we can see that les restrictions deviennent de plus en plus sévères. Les Juifs doivent porter l'étoile jaune et plus tard, on fait référence à l'interdiction des Juifs d'entrer dans les cinémas et dans les trains. So we can see that the restrictions are starting to really bite. The other changes are the fact that people's attitudes are starting to change against Jews. And the first time we see this is when the boys go to school and ils entrent dans la cour, ils portent l'étoile jaune et les attitudes de leurs camarades de classe changent. All of a sudden, they aren't just Joe and Maurice, they are the Youpins, and there are references to the fact that it is the Jews that have started the war. But it's not just their classmates' attitude that's changed, it's also that of their teachers. So we have a little description on page 41. Going on to, on page 41, where Joe has started to notice that his teacher isn't really paying him any attention. He doesn't ask him any questions. He never asks him up to the board. So he decides to do something to deliberately try and make his teacher react. And he pushes his slate, which is what they were writing on at the time, he pushes his slate off the table because one of his teacher's key rules is silence, and it says that on page 40. Le père Boulier, il avait une manie, c'était le silence. So le père Boulier is the name of his class teacher. So Joe pushes this tile off the table and he gets absolutely no reaction from Père Boulier. Père Boulier looks at him and then very slowly he carries on the lesson, whereas normally Joe would have expected to have been punished. And we've got Joe, the narrator, on page 42, saying at the end of that, La leçon était commencée et j'ai compris que pour moi l'école était finie. So we've got this voice coming in saying, actually I understood that school was something else that I couldn't enjoy anymore. It was all over for me. So the second key change is people's attitude to Joe and Maurice, people who they've been friends with for years, teachers who've had this teacher-student relationship with them. Linked to that is the impact on Jewish people. And we particularly see this in the fact that the school children feel free to attack the boys. There's an episode after the class lesson where he's pushed the tile off, where Joe is surrounded by a group of people. He'd had a little run-in with them in the morning when he arrived, but as he comes out of the lesson, he's faced by all these boys shouting, Youpin, Youpin, and he says on page 42, Ils dansaient autour de moi, they were dancing around me, un m'a poussé dans le dos. So one of them pushed me in my back, and we can see that he gets actually quite badly beaten up. So these school children, reflecting the attitudes that they're starting to see in the street, feel free to attack the boys in the yard. The last big change in this chapter is, of course, the fact that their lives are about to change irreversibly, because with le départ de Joe and Maurice, that is the end of their childhood. And this key phrase right at the end of the chapter, on page 58, is « C'en était fait de l'enfance ». That was childhood done with. because everything from this point, they are navigating their way through the world as adults, even though they are still two young, naive boys. But the big change at the end of chapter 3 is the fact that they've gone from this loving, warm, stable environment where the parents are there to look after them, make decisions for them, and they go out into the wide world and they're told to make their way to La Zone Libre, where the two older brothers are, and they have to do it all by themselves. So for them, childhood is over. So those are the key changes. Now, the key themes that come up are recurring themes throughout this novel. So don't worry, there's not going to be lots of different themes for every chapter. So one of the main themes that comes up here is identity and religion. And the ideas that are coming through on page 43, we've got Joe talking about how he doesn't understand why he is different. Now, he's already made a reference to this in previous pages, how the stereotype of the Jew, it doesn't look anything like him. But on page 43, this large paragraph at the bottom, about third line down, he says, j'avais la même couleur que les autres, la même tête. J'avais entendu parler de religions différentes et on m'avait appris à l'école que des gens s'étaient battus autrefois pour cela, mais moi, je n'avais pas de religion. So he's very clear that he doesn't look any different to anybody else. And more than that, he doesn't actually follow religion closely. He talks about going playing basketball behind the church on Thursdays, and that the priest comes out, gives them some wartime chocolate. He does everything that the normal boys, that the other boys in his area do. He doesn't see why he is different. He doesn't understand what it is to be Jewish. So his lack of understanding of his religion is quite poignant, because he's going to suffer for it, yet he doesn't even understand why he's suffering for it. There's this link to Jewish history. Now, we've discussed before how Jewish groups of people, Jewish settlements, have been continuously persecuted throughout history across various countries. And we've got this idea being carried on as well. On page 57, the dad makes reference to what it used to be like, because Joe says to him at the bottom of page 56, qu'est-ce que c'est un juif? And Dad says, well, I'm not really sure. And he goes on to tell him, in the past, nous habitions un pays où on a été chassés, alors nous sommes partis partout. And he says, c'est la chasse qui est réouverte. So this hunt, this chase, the verb chasser is the verb to chase, but it's also the verb to hunt. It started again. So we've got this idea of what's happening to Joe and Maurice, linking into what happened to their dad in Russia, linking into what happened to their grandfather before that, but also it linking into the wider history of the Jewish people, that they've constantly been persecuted throughout history. And right at the very end of this chapter, as Mum and Dad are stood watching the boys head off towards the train station, it says that he later learned that his dad stood there watching them, berçant une douleur immémoriale. So cradling this age-old hurt. So he wasn't just sad to see what was happening to his sons, he's sad to see that it is happening yet again. Now, another key theme in this chapter, which is really highlighted, is that of childhood. This is always going to be a key topic. The events are narrated largely through the eyes of a child. So, nous, le lecteur, on apprend l'histoire à travers les yeux d'un enfant. Yes, we do have the voice of the narrator coming in, but the events are largely told to us from the perspective of a naive 10-year-old boy to start with. We also have the events at school, so very based in childhood events. And we see that casual cruelty of others, of school children. As a strong contrast with what's about to come, pages 48 to 50, after the boys have come home from school and it's clear to Dad that they've been beaten up, he says, right, you're not going back this afternoon. You're not coming home in that state again. Have the afternoon off. And they spend the rest of the day up to bedtime wandering around their area. And it's clear that they're very comfortable there, that they love being there. They've got little in things that they do. They go and try and buy eucalyptus cigarettes. They know the people as they're walking around. And we can see they are really, really happy. When they go home, we have this voice of the narrator on page 50 saying, J'aimais ces toits, ces monuments qui s'estampaient au loin. So I really loved this place. I loved these rooftops. But je ne savais pas encore que je ne reverrais plus ce paysage si familier. Je ne savais pas que d'ici quelques heures, je ne serais plus un enfant. I didn't know that within a few hours I would no longer be a child. So we've got this really touching contrast of the boys having this carefree afternoon, wandering around, having lots of fun. But this is their last moment of being carefree children. And the last thing that comes here, and this links to the idea of identity, is le mensonge, lying, the importance of lying. We have this episode where they are sat around dinner and Dad has told them the story of what happened to him. And he says, do you know why I'm telling you all this? And Maurice replies, yeah, because we've got to go too, haven't we? And the dad says, oui, c'est votre tour. It's your turn. I'm passing this on to you. This is what happens to us as Jews. But then on page 56, the dad gives them this piece of advice that they are never, ever to forget. Right at the top of page 56, he says, il faut que vous sachiez une chose. Vous êtes juif, mais ne l'avouez jamais. Vous entendez jamais. So his advice is very clear. You can never, never admit that you are Jewish. So this theme of le mensonge, lying, is inextricably linked to identity and religion. And Dad starts shouting at Joe, tu es juif? Are you Jewish? And when Joe says no, he slaps Joe across the face. Joe says he's never touched me in that way before. Ne mens pas, tu es juif, Joseph? Non. And Joe's crying out. And then Dad backs off, and it's clear that he was doing that as a test. He said to them, don't ever, ever admit it. And he immediately starts shouting and slapping his son to make sure that he's got that message, because they will be put in that situation later. So, key changes in this chapter. Restrictions against Jews, attitude of people towards them, and the end of their happy home as they set off, the end of their childhood. And the themes, we've got identity and religion linked to lying or denial of identity, and we've got the end of their childhood. So lots of things going on in chapter 3. It's a really important chapter, and it ends with the boys being given lots of money. I can't remember how much it was. And they go off into the night. The address of their older brothers is written on a tiny scrap of paper in the bottom of their backpacks. And Mum and Dad try and put on a brave face, and they push them out into the night with instructions to make their way to the zone libre and find their brothers. And the parents tell them that they will join them later. End of lesson.